Hey guys, welcome to Y&R Daily News YouTube channel. Today's topics: Young and the Restless, full episode Tuesday. October 7th reveals the tense conflict between Billy and Jack that Jill panics to find a way to stop. Under the tense atmosphere of Genoa City, a chain of conspiracy power family suddenly tightens around the Chancellor Abbott Newman family. At the center is Kane Ashby, a man walking a thin line between his ambition to redefine himself through technology and his need to be recognized in a family where he always feels like an outsider. When information about the AI software developed by Kane begins to leak, Billy Abbott seizes the opportunity to push the story to the moral frontier, while Jill, a woman who has been through enough storms to know that everyone has gray areas, is forced to choose between her vigilant reason and her protective instinct. On the upper floor, Billy sees Victor Newman and Jack Abbott hanging out with each other in a rare sense, not to reconcile, but to test each other for a new trigger they can't control. The chill of a three-way confrontation, Newman, Abbott, and Kane, has blown through Genoa City's corridors of power. In Billy's telling, Kane's AI software is not just a business tool, but a reputational weapon of destruction. A system that can simulate the decision-making habits of Genoa's key players, predict their reactions to crisis, and thereby tweak the markets, the media, and even internal factions to a scenario that favors the mastermind. Billy doesn't need technical proof. He needs a moral story to wake Jill up, and one that's powerful enough to bring back memories of Jill's bad bats. Billy presses on that weakness. You turned your back on me. Now you dare turn your back on Kane. The criticism was like a knife twisting a knife because it struck Jill's greatest fear, abandoning her loved ones again when they needed her most. But after Billy left, the room suddenly felt too big for Jill. She sat for a long time, staring out the window, wondering if she was being forced into a game that both men she loved would lose. Jill had spent her life learning to balance on the tightrope between love and power. She called Kane not to question, but to listen. She saw not the cold CEO, nor the perfect son-in-law, but a man torn by rejection. Kane began by instinctively denying the accusations. He talked about data strategy, about forecasting, about risk models that work just like every corporation does. But then the defenses began to fray, and the truth was rarely told in technical terms. It comes out in the tiredness in his eyes and the silence between his breaths. Kane admits he has gone too far in using AI to understand people because understanding to lead is not always different from understanding to manipulate. In Genoa City, that line is blurred by a history of power shocks. There are moments when he feels like he should shut everything down, lock himself in his castle, not just a mansion, but a safe shell he has built, so he doesn't. While Jill tried to keep the conversation anchored on the family shore, Billy's storm intensified. Billy believed Victor and Jack were conspiring, not because they were suddenly allies, but because they both felt the need to stifle an unforeseen variable, Kane and his technology. Billy watched, pieced together, and then concluded, if Newman and Abbott, two opposing poles of power, were preparing a precaution, then Kane must be touching a nerve they both feared. Billy's anger then wasn't just directed at Kane. It was also directed at Jack, the brother he believed was underestimating the threat, or worse, willing to compromise in a way that would backfire on his family. Anger can turn violent, and given the history of their altercations, a rash shove could turn into serious injury. Jill knew that better than anyone. She rushes into the role of firefighter, trying to stop an Abbott versus Abbott confrontation before it happens in the wrong place at the wrong time. But stopping the fire in real life doesn't necessarily put out the fire in your heart. Jill hears this time really listening. Kane's not quite guilty confession. I don't know who I am anymore. That confession, vague as it may seem, has a terrifying core. When a person manipulates technology to model another person, the first to erode is his own self. Cain has let algorithms define other people's capabilities, risks, and motives for so long that he has lost his own soft definitions. Love, trust, tolerance. Jill doesn't justify actions that might cross legal lines, but she gives Cain what the tech mogul can't: a fulcrum to stop before he crosses the red line. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. She speaks of second chances, not as a privilege, but as a commitment. Never trade your family for another power play. In a parallel narrative, Victor and Jack certainly don't stand still. Both are masters of reading the situation. If Cain retreats, everything is quiet. If Cain strikes back, or someone sets off the media bombshell about AI manipulating people, Genoa City will shake. Victor will prepare a plan to block the flow of unfavorable information, while Jack will probably find a way to isolate the risk from Jabo. But no matter how they calculate, the emotional sum is in the hands of Billy, who is at the boiling point. A hasty decision by Billy, a mistimed remark, a split-second rush, and the family tragedy can explode before the conspiracy of the two veterans has even taken shape. The question, whose side will Jill be on, is therefore no longer a political question. It is a question of survival, standing in the middle to keep both sides intact. The climax subsided, not with a twist, but with a hug. When Cain finally let go of his hard shell, tears flowed. He spoke of the temptation to burn it all down as a shortcut to escape the maze of identities. But destruction leaves only ashes, something Jill knew all too well. She hugged Cain tightly, hugging him so tightly that the seemingly emotionless man could feel the familiar heartbeat of a home. There were no algorithms running in the background, no predictive models that classified good and evil by probability. There was only a silent message. There was time to stop. There was time to fix. There was time to choose to return. From that hug, the story opened up two paths. One path led to a compromise. Cain agreed to put the AI project under strict control, make its scope transparent, withdraw from ethically ambiguous applications in exchange for the opportunity to patch things up with his family and restore public trust. The other path leads to escalation. Emotions subside, rationality returns, and his simmering anger can flare up again, especially if Victor or Jack makes a defensive move that Cain sees as a humiliating blow. Billy in either direction remains an unpredictable variable. He can become the family's foil, or the spark that ignites a larger explosion. But for Jill at least, the priority is clear: rebuilding the fence of love before erecting any more legal or media barriers. In terms of power structures, Friday's episode is not one of decisive victory or defeat, but of thresholds. Billy has discovered Victor and Jack are plotting against the big table, but he is forced to ask, will anger save Jack or only hurt him more? Jill has heard what she needs to hear to know that Cain is not a monster. He is a man wavering between three names, searching for a name to forgive himself. As for Cain, after admitting his ego gap, he made his first choice towards healing, allowing himself to be vulnerable in his mother's arms, something that power never brought. And it was there that the young and the restless repeated a lesson, old yet new: all schemes, all software, from power to technology, ultimately fail when competing with family when that family speaks up at the right time. Jill spoke up with a hug. Genoa City will judge the rest. But before they do, they will have to admit, sometimes to save a person, you don't need to break their tools. You need to help them remember who they were when they had no tools. Cain touched that moment. How long it lasts is a story for the next episodes. In the thickly suspicious atmosphere of Genoa City, where every promise is measured as a contract clause, and every handshake can be an invisible handcuff, Jack Abbott is forced to stand on the same line with Victor Newman. the Abbott family's historical rival because of one name, Cain-Ashb. The fragmented pieces of Cain's AI conspiracy have created a rift that extends from Jabo to Newman Enterprises and all the way to Chancellor, forcing those who once vowed never to shake hands to measure the line between personal animosity and survival interests. But just when the plan to meet Jill to lock the game seems to be settled, Jack and Victor collide. Victor insists on a joint meeting with Jill to close Pandora's box before the AI story explodes into the public, while Jack, cautious in his own way, wants to clarify the scope and order of who speaks first, who gives in, who promises what before both appear before Jill. The disagreement was not about the goal, but about the method. Victor was used to preemptive strikes and domination, while Jack understood that with Jill, respect for order and emotion was the only key to avoiding backlash. The fragile bond between the two rivals was further fizzed when Victor raised an old but painful concern. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Billy Abbott, unreliable, Victor said bluntly, as if by professional conclusion, and he pushed Jack to admit that Jack had the same concern, albeit silently. The blow was heavier than any risk figures, because it hit straight to the Abbott family's bloodline. Every time Billy was left out of control, Jabal's internal risks always increased exponentially. Jack chose his words carefully, but the truth was that he had struggled many times to shield his brother, while also holding the company's front. He understood that Victor was right in his diagnosis. It was just that Victor's way of exposing Billy would make the case worse. The argument was interrupted by the very heart of the risk. Billy appeared, his eyes both wary and provocative, and asked Jack and Victor directly, "What the hell is going on here?" Jack didn't beat around the bush. He called it a necessary alliance, a situational collaboration to limit the damage from the AI applications Cain might be pursuing. Billy was initially irritated by Reflex, but then the word necessary hit home. If Victor and Jack were in the same room, the risk had already exceeded the normal threshold. He grunted in agreement in principle, then pressed. What was the specific plan? Who was the target? And where was the desired endpoint? Victor wasn't about to expose the battle plan to someone he had just classified as untrustworthy. He turned the question around. Billy had just spoken to Jill, and according to Billy's own sources, Jill had gone to find Cain immediately. Why? Billy, in a moment of confusion, was forced to drag the family thread into the middle of the power game. He told Jill all about Cain's AI scheme, presented the risk framework, the impact on reputation, and the market. But Jill's reaction did not go as he had planned. Instead of jumping into the battle like an ally, Jill focused on Billy himself, recalling a series of impulsive decisions and times he had broken trust. Billy recounted it as a grievance, but also as a naked truth in Chancellor and in Jill. The level of trust in Billy was now lower than necessary for him to lead a campaign against Cain, not missing the opportunity. Victor quickly concluded the operation. The plan to meet Jill together had to change immediately. If both Victor and Jack were brought before Jill, the story could easily turn into a power play between two big families forcing a mother, a boss who used to be a symbol of overcoming difficulties for Chancellor to choose. This situation both triggered Jill's defensive reflex and allowed Cain to play the victim of the Abbott-Newman alliance. Divide and conquer. Victor gave a concise tactical order. Instead of going together, each would approach a different direction. One would speak to Jill in the language of accountability and transparency. The other would handle the variable called Billy, quelling the risk of leaks and emotional outbursts that could ruin everything in an instant. The operational picture shifts from meeting to risk management. The first axis of risk is Jill. She's not just a powerful shareholder. She's the Chancellor's link to Jabo. And in this context, the only person who can pull Cain back from the brink or push him into full-on confrontation. The right approach would be to acknowledge 3 very Jill layers of anxiety. Fear of losing a loved one. Cain, fear of losing control. The person talking to Jill must present her with a complete roadmap. A third-party technical audit of Cain's AI platform. A commitment to a scope that doesn't touch the area of behavioral manipulation or sensitive data intrusion. And most importantly, a landing point so Jill doesn't feel cornered by the 2 big guys. It's the kind of presentation Jack does better than Victor. Soft, detailed, and able to juxtapose family emotions with business needs. The second axis of risk is Billy. He is both a source and a trigger. If he is removed from the information circle, he can easily ignite the media. If he is kept too deep in the war zone, he can ruin the plot with his personal reactions. The person handling Billy needs to understand that what he wants now is not just to be believed, but to be given a meaningful role, putting him in the position of supervising media discipline, giving him a clear runway, reports, timelines, boundaries to not cross is much better than asking him to sit still and wait for results. This is again a familiar Victor tactic, turning the erratic person into a KPI bearer, forcing emotions to go through the process channel. The depth of the problem, of course, lies in Cain himself and his AI conspiracy. What Billy presented made everyone shudder, not because the technology was so advanced, but because it was so, in keeping with Genoa's culture, a platform capable of simulating the reactions of key leaders to certain events, thereby proposing the optimal course of action to steer public opinion, investors, and even competitors. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. The line between corporate intelligence and behavioral manipulation became blurred, and everyone who had been hit by the media had reason to fear. But they also understood if Cain was forced to wipe out the whole thing, he would fight to the end. If given a controlled path to legalization, he could both save face and be forced into a framework at the same time. The divide and conquer plan was therefore not to crush Cain, but to force him onto the audit compliance monitoring track, with Jill as the sponsor and responsible person. On the upper floor, the bargaining between Jack and Victor was still a classic problem. Who leads? Who follows? Who takes the political risk if public opinion explodes? Jack wanted a joint statement, ready to be activated when needed, emphasizing the spirit of voluntary technology review for the benefit of the business community. Victor wanted to keep his cards close to the chest until the last minute, ready to strike hard if either side stumbled. Those 2 different styles could only find common ground if they both agreed that Billy's role had to be locked in advance. And so, a temporary plan was formed. Jack would approach Jill alone. No posturing, no pressure. Framing the story within the preservation of the family and the business ecosystem framework. Victor stayed with Billy to zone in on him, turning him into a link with a specific task and a clear control point. Only when these 2 prongs were stable would they make the next move with Cain. The rest of the closed-door meeting becomes a risk-sharing table. If Jill agrees to an independent audit of the AI platform and temporarily freezes sensitive applications, the stakes will be lower. If Jill gets angry because she feels manipulated, Cain will have an excuse to create a weak man surrounded by 2 big guys story. At which point, Victor plans to release a technical proof of concept package showing which modules need to be shut down immediately, according to industry ethics standards. If Billy reacts negatively because he's left out, Jack will be the one to call him directly, giving him oversight of internal communications so he doesn't feel deprived. Every branch has a landing point, and the very existence of landing points makes the split-up plan less risky than a potentially inflammatory meat-hill swoop. From a human resources perspective, this is also a lesson in emotional discipline. that Jack must apply to himself. He knew Victor always liked to play the role of commander-in-chief, but talking to Jill about Kane required a different tone. Not orders, but commitments. Not threats, but reassurance. He decided to bring not lawyers, but documents from a reputable technology auditing firm, with a proposal for an AI ethics framework to be applied internally within the three houses: Jabao, Newman, Chancellor, and Victor. After a moment of arguing, also changed gears. He talked to Billy less with threats and more with clear frameworks, deadlines, reporting milestones, a list of media flashpoints to watch. When you give someone a mission they can be proud of, they will work hard not to mess it up. When the conference room door closed, Genoa City was Genoa City. Rumors spread quickly. Judgment came early, and every noise in the glass buildings could be translated into an echo in the press corridor. But something changed that afternoon. Victor no longer wanted to drag Jack along to see Jill. He believed the split-up approach would be more traumatic. Jack, on the other hand, was willing to sacrifice the security of having an escort force in exchange for the opportunity to speak to Jill in the language she deserved. Billy, who had just created a new spiral out of his need to be trusted, was given the very thing that could have saved him: a concrete role to prove his worth beyond his impulses. And at the epicenter, Jill would soon have to choose. She could stand up to shield Kane with a process of audit reform monitoring, keeping him in the arms of his family instead of pushing him into the fray. Or she could fight back because she felt cornered, letting things slip through her fingers. But whatever she chose, Victor's decision to divide and conquer laid the groundwork for a smarter war. Instead of showing off their strength, they divided their targets, spoke the right language to the right people, and set up landing strips. In a city where power is often accompanied by emotion, that was a big step forward. The story thus ended, not with a punch on the table, but with a series of small but decisive gestures. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Jack left the room, audit files in hand, his mind already preparing his words for Jill. Victor stayed behind, opening both impulsive man into a pace setter, and behind the reflective glass of the buildings, Kane's silhouette remained looming, like a technological unknown waiting to be named. Divide and conquer was more than a ploy. In this context, it was the art of using reason to separate the sparks before they met the wind. If successful, Genoa City would survive the shock without an explosion. If all else fails, at least the Helms have tried to create escape routes for everyone, including the most troublemaker, Billy Abbott.